I'm James Bergman, also known as Ahead of the Curve, and I have Brandon with me. Brandon's Bookshelf, really, really cool channel that you have, Brandon. Um, I noticed that you have a good way of interacting with your viewers, and the list, the tagging that you do. You really bring people together, which is something that I probably don't do as well as you.
Oh, well, thank
I,
you.
yeah, I just love how you film your stuff, and the even the thumbnails are really cool, like the gold, and I love how you lay it all out. Anyway, so yeah, this is our first chat together, and we're going to be talking about effective altruism. Right. So, what is effective altruism? I've just thought of writing down a definition just to get us going, and you can you can refute this definition if you feel like there's a bit of edit to it. If you have a different conception of it, we can talk about the definition, because obviously in philosophy definitions are everything.
Right.
So maybe we can talk about that. So I've got from here, and this was just Google of what I could find really, but effective altruism is the maximization of desirous beneficial acts upon people and the world for the greater good of society. Is there anything you'd edit about that? Have you got any additional thoughts about how you define it?
That's an interesting definition. I think it's fine. I think what I like about effective altruism is that it's not as philosophically hung up as, say, utilitarianism, which I love. And I love the importance of words and the precision of language for sure. But at the same time, what's cool about effective altruism is it's not about us. It's looking outward. And so when you get to be selfless for once, I think that some other walls start to fall down. I think it's a great working definition. How I have always viewed it, if we're just going to kind of try to marry some things together, is it's using logic, rationality, science, study, follow up, a lot of the amazing tools that we have access to now to do the most good. You know, the tagline, even the book, is always doing good better. That it's not just enough to do good, that there's something approximating the best, most maximized way of doing something. And that's what we should be looking for.
Yeah, no, I'm completely on the side of that. I was doing some revision today on the subject, and the book that you have right there came up. That looked like such a cool book.
Oh, it's awesome. It's
Yeah,
I have it out because I think it's the single greatest. I mean, there's so many books about ethics, right? Like I lined up some of my favorite ethic books,
yeah,
and it doesn't begin to scratch the surface of moral philosophy and ethical philosophy that has been done since the beginning of thinking about these things, which is the beginning of time. I mean, people have always thought about this. And it definitely came into a light, you know, with Plato and Aristotle and things like that, and then had a huge resurgence in the 17 and 1800s with Bentham and Kant and John Stuart Mill and people like this when we get into utilitarianism. But doing good better, Will MacAskill is a Scottish philosopher, modern day philosopher, who really, I think, spearheaded this under the influence of Peter Singer. Are you familiar with Singer?
yeah. No, I've read his Animal Liberation. It's one of the
Yes.
first kind of sources that I had in actually getting into veganism, like understanding the topic more. And yeah, I love that book. Yeah,
Yeah, and so animal liberation is definitely wow. Singer does this with any topic though, where he really makes you feel it, and it's not just his emotion because he doesn't hide back from his true feelings about it. He's not preachy either though. I don't know what the right word is. He just expresses his compassion very well. But he also is just the thought experiments, the scientific data, the studies, the psychology behind everything that he presents. One of my favorite books by him is what's the name of it? Ethics in the Real World. It's like 82 brief essays where he lists something problematic: abortion, veganism, euthanasia. And he just lists very briefly the positions and then where he's at with it currently. And it's such an objective way of just like helping you think about what you think about. So I'm getting off track because I love talking about Singer. But yes, Will MacAskill and Peter Singer together with a host of other people have really put this movement more into the light because it is an activism, right? It's not just a philosophical mindset. If it was just that, you just dial back to moral philosophy. It's a true doing, an acting out, and under that movement, there's many people that write about it and explain it. What I like about this book in particular, if I was giving the recommendation for why it's a starting point, is it gives you enough examples and understanding about why our approach in the past has failed in terms of giving or alleviating suffering or anything like that. And what we've been doing in the recent past under this approach and the results that it's getting, and then what we can do right now to continue and to better that. And so in terms of just a landscape laid out in front of us of what's really working, I don't think you can beat it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's it feels self-evident in a way, because you ask people, well, I mean, let me ask you, why do you think we should do good at all? Why would you say, on a personal level, we should bother?
It's a really interesting question. I don't know if it's as simple as my definition versus yours. I'd be curious to hear both our thoughts. Let's both answer this. I've actually, one of the last buddy reads I did was called The Kindness of Strangers. And it's about the evolutionary psychology of building up towards being a selfless individual from a very selfish beginning. Which we all know in evolutionary theory. I mean, it's entirely selfish driven. It's the only way that it works, right? And so I have long wondered and still am not quite convinced that there is such a thing as a selfless act. And that's its own discussion for sure. But in terms of your question, it's related because you said this in a video that I watched you talk about veganism, that the reason you did that is because you wanted to be philosophically consistent, which I loved that term. And I've used it ever since I watched your video, by the way, a few times.
Cool.
And I feel the same way. When you start to understand that there's suffering, something at some point happens that makes us more aware than we were previously or as children. And once you have that knowledge, and then once you see that you are not suffering as much and that you can do something to help alleviate it, and that you would want someone to do that for you, then it just becomes a principle and becomes a value or an ethic if you think through it that much, where it's, am I going to be consistent with my actions that I am in my thinking or my preaching? And that's what I loved so much about this movement and this book, is it allowed me a resource to be philosophically consistent. What about you, though? Let's pose the question back to you.
Well, I want to point out that your answer was really, really interesting. I'm glad that my sort of phrasing has rubbed off somewhere. But I mean, yeah, why should we do? I mean, I immediately think of, well, I suppose if we want to live collectively in a society, being immoral doesn't really help you very much. It doesn't get you that far. You have to, I mean, look, there needs to be some sort of tit for tat. There needs to be this reciprocal altruism, like Dawkins would have said in The Selfish Gene. Like there needs to be some of that, right? But we have to admit at the same time that our standards are subjective. But then, and I've talked to some religious folk about this, and they say, well, you can't justify your morality. It's not that you can't do any good, because that's a separate question, right? And Christopher Hitchens famously got that mixed up, right? The theologians weren't necessarily saying that he can't do the same acts as them. They were saying that he can't justify his moral acts. Yeah, I mean, I just think of the collective. I just think what actually works. But we can go into veganism at some point if you'd want to. Is there anything you want to pick up from that?
There's a lot, man. There's so many things you touched on that are interesting. The first is there objective morality, right? And I love, many people disagree with it, and I'm not sure your stance on Sam Harris's moral landscape, on his moral objectivity, but because it is hard to get the ought from is, right? I get the whole argument for sure, but Sam has such a good way of saying heaven and hell, religious or non-religiously speaking, and Peterson says something like this too, approximating there's something, however, get rid of religion, get rid of all the titles, get rid of all the belief systems, there's something approximating heaven, better, pleasure, and there's something approximating hell, pain, suffering, worse. And if we all can understand that, and we can all, even if it's an assumption, and I don't think it is, assume that other humans, other sentient beings like ourselves, have this same approximation to go towards heaven and away from hell, then I think we can start getting into an interesting moral question of, is it immoral not to help people when you have the ability to? And Peter Singer actually has a four-premise thought experiment that lays that out, that we're actually doing wrong not to do good. And then if we know we can do good better, we're morally wrong to not do it in the best way possible. And so we're getting off on many roads, but one of those roads is there an objective morality? And with or without it, though, with or without religion, atheist or believer, if we do choose to help, what's cool about the book and the movement is you don't have to figure that stuff out. You don't have to have a reason you can justify, like the great debates. You don't have to choose a religion. You can just say, hey, for whatever reason, and maybe I'm not philosophically elegant enough to state what it is, I do want to help other people. And so if that's my position, here's the best way possible. And it just takes so much of the argument out and looks at, let's get to some action. Though I do love the argument, and I do think it's important to be able to articulate. The last thing that I'll say based off what you said that I think is so interesting is you're 100% right on the reciprocity. There's no doubt through all of the research, all of the studies, all of the evolutionary psychology, that a theory of social justice, gossip, of tit for tat, of reciprocity is why our societies have functioned. If we didn't expect someone to do the other thing after we did it, we would have never traded. We would have never survived. We would have never interacted with other tribes, etc. So that's real. So the question that a lot of people have, and an issue they take with effective altruism is, okay, if that's true, why should I not care more about the homeless person in front of my stairs every morning than someone who's going to starve to death this afternoon halfway across the country? Because my reciprocity for them, there's nothing I can expect for them to do back for me. But if I help this homeless person, A, it alleviates my guilt every morning. He might get a job and contribute to my actual tax bracket and local economy. So if you're like parsing out that theory of reciprocity, then there's no good reason to help someone on the other side of the planet when you have someone in front of you. And effective altruism would say that's not true. Because if you're being as effective with your dollar as possible, it's easier to save a life and improve a life in Africa or India right now than the person in front of you downstairs. And so that's a really interesting question that I'd put back to you is, if your answer is mainly a humanistic understanding and reciprocity and having a society that works, what's your initial instinct on giving elsewhere?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic because there are some controversies. The thing is, I mean, with the example that you pointed out with the person on your doorstep, that I mean, the differences between overseas sharing some financial, some money, is that you send the money off and then they do what they do with it, right? Or at least a company does, a charity does. Whereas on the doorstep, there's much more physical labor. There's your promise in that person. You have to spend time with them. So there's a lot more effort going on there. And the problem is that it's not immediately evident whether that effort will be reciprocated, right? So there has to be an element of faith there. And look, fair enough. In any form of charity, any form, there is a level of faith. But the question is, well, how much faith do you put into it? Because, for example, many charities have been exposed for mishandling the finances, warlords taking the money instead. So really, it's a question of not contribution but distribution. That's the question. It's the quality of distribution.
Yes. So now you're thinking like an effective altruist, because you're saying, where did my dollar go and how much good did it do? And even if it's for a selfish reason of wanting to know that if you part with your well-earned money that you could have bought the next coffee or next book with and instead gave it away, did it work for you? And it's funny because there's a few levels to this. One is that generally speaking, even though we might kind of talk about this and get upset when there's a charity that gets found out for not being very effective. We don't treat giving the same way we do the rest of our finances. If we choose to give, we pick a percentage and we do it. And that's about it. Now, you would never do that with a stock you invested in. You would watch it. You would be ready to move your money. You would be ready to make changes because you are more personally interested in the outcome. And for charity, for most people, from the research, the outcome is feeling good, even if that's the only level of reciprocity. So you're done once you've given the money. And that's what so much of this argument is about, is not being done there, and that now we don't have to guess anymore. So I'm going to give you an example from the book. You haven't read the book, right?
I haven't read that one.
Okay.
Not doing good better. Yeah.
So here's a cool example. This is what starts the entire book that kind of lays the groundwork, and I'll try to cover it a lot quicker because it's a whole chapter here. So I'm going to be really brief. There was this charity in the early 90s that was awesome. It was Play Pump International. And what they did is they made this new pump that worked like a merry-go-round. So the kids could have fun in these villages where they had no toys and no entertainment, and it would actually pump the water from the wells instead of these moms getting up at the crack of dawn and pumping all of the time with the hand pumps, which is what the standard was. And everyone in the States got so excited about this. The Clintons started talking about it. They won all of these awards. They raised tens of millions of dollars, and they went and they put these play pumps everywhere. And then one day, someone decided to follow up. And what they found is they broke down very often. They couldn't be replaced by the locals, unlike a normal hand pump. The kids got very tired, which means the moms would end up pushing them. So now the moms are still exerting the same effort that was supposed to be alleviated by the kids doing it. So now you either have like pushing this huge merry-go-round instead of an easier hand pump, and they just didn't get used. So this is a huge waste. Even though it looked sexy, it had a cool name, it was hitting multiple causes, and if you had given your money, you would have felt good and then been done with it. So they contrast that with, there was a study that was done very well, unlike Play Pump International, with these students in India. They weren't going to school. Why? We need to get attendance up in school. This is the mission of this other charity. And so they tried things in a scientific method, control groups, variables, A/B testing, all kinds of stuff. Whether it was, we need better teachers, more teachers. Let's give the kids uniforms, give them a sense of dignity, and maybe they'll show up more. Let's get them better books, more interactive materials. And the thing that worked, because they actually studied it and tracked the results, was deworming. Most of these kids were missing school because of how sick they were from worms, which is the simplest thing in the world. It's not sexy to talk about. A deworming pill for one kid for 1 year costs less than $1 US. It increased the level of attendance by over 30%. It paid for itself in community taxes that they got back from those children being educated and going into the workforce after the fact. And it was so simple once you had the data. And so comparing these two different ideas about giving to a charity, knowing where your money is going, getting people excited to give, like, it showed a huge hole in the system that we don't follow through. We get excited by ideas, not by results, etc. And so I wanted to just bring that up to kind of set the stage for like a lot of what I think we're talking about here.
Well, it sounds like a great chapter. Yeah,
it is indeed.
I would commend that breakdown.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, I would like to delve into the idea of, can somebody be fully altruistic? I think, well, we agree from off the bat, but I would like your opinion on why somebody can't be fully altruistic or genuinely altruistic.
Yeah, there's still a part of me that wants to be able to say, yes, we can. Yes, we are. Maybe with enough enlightenment, someone could be, with enough separation from their ego. But I think the reality is we're hardwired. We're predispositioned from birth through evolutionary psychology to look for what's in it for me. And that manifests itself differently in different kinds of people, just based off personalities and nature and nurture and genetics. For some people, it is just a sense of being consistent, right, with their nature. For some people, it's you owe me, right? True tit for tat. For some people, it's they think that it's about their empathy But what it really is, when you dive down into it and look at their brain through fMRI machines and things like this, is alleviating their their so we are compassionate and empathetic individuals, and those are two different terms, but for sake of this argument, it makes us feel altruistic to feel bad on someone's behalf. But what that is that's an internal fear of, what if I was them and someone wasn't helping me, or it's making me sad to see someone like this, and if I make them not like this, I'm no longer sad. So again, no matter how many different like versions you put on this, or pretty language, or, well, what if someone's feeling like this, or what if they give anonymously, or what if, all the reasons that someone has said one can be altruistic, where I'm leaning based off all the research I've been able to see thus far in the books I've looked at, is it always comes back to, it still does something for us, even if it's a byproduct, even if you are trying not to receive anything. However I split, at the end of the day, if I just looked at myself for a second afterwards, it was still benefiting me, or I felt proud, or whatever. And that's not bad. It's okay to have two things that are good, and one of them is good for you. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people get held up on, is it's okay if you end up getting a selfish gain from it, but don't say that you didn't, because you did. And so that's my long answer of where I'm at right now with it.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the idea that somebody would try and hide their own proudness, or pride, whatever you want to call it, or I suppose emotional income, you could say, from the thing. I mean, that is deception, isn't it? This is just a part of life. Like, yeah, giving to charity, we can't control the chemical reactions going off in our brain, our dopamine, etc., going off when we do that. Like, our intentions might be completely utilitarian, or whatever, completely philosophical, but we can't help but feel morally better, right? And we just can't escape that. And like you say, to deny that is promoting this deception that is just really unnecessary. And as well as you put it, it's okay. Like, it's actually okay. There's no pressure to feel like, yes, I need to not feel any pleasure whatsoever from
Yeah.
this. Like,
Just
it's
to
all
prove
good.
some concept. Yeah. Win-win is
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. I mean, that's the
yeah,
desired outcome of any happenings.
yeah. I would also sort of build upon that, and I would also insert the idea that, like, people are sometimes also projecting their own psychology. Some people, a lot of people, let's say, I don't know, working for charity companies, they might actually have a mode of psychology within them that predestines them to be more likely to give to charity, and to be charitable in character. And this is another example of, you can't get full altruism, because, like, yeah, like, there's that whole chemical reaction, right? But there's also our background, our life, and how we've been predicated to be more charitable, because, I don't know, maybe we've gone through some trauma, so you're more likely to want to work with people who have been through the same experiences. And that isn't because, well, I mean, look, a part of it is to console yourself, and to say, look, I can do something in response to that. My experience wasn't meaningless. And look, fair enough, fair enough. But we have to admit at the same time that that is going to be the case, right? We have to admit that if you've gone through something like a trauma in any regard, or any experience, let's say, that was profound upon you, you're more likely to help those who have felt the same. And so, look, that's why psychology departments are full of personality characters who are, large on these whole issues, right, in their head, because it's probably likely that they are dealing with the same stuff, right, as their patients in some regard. And not only
Yeah.
are
The
they,
whole physician heal thyself kind of deal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's, it's easy to say from a psychological perspective that, yeah, sure, look, it's selfish, but on the other side of that, look, at least it's creating meaning where meaning was not to be found at some point. That's something. That is something. It's better than nothing. It's better than, living a life and not using the experience that you've conjured from the past. I mean, that's even more of a sin, or whatever, however you want to put it. So,
Yeah. Total waste. You've gone
yeah,
through this thing that could make you more susceptible to helping others, to being aware of suffering that other people can't see with normal blinders on, who haven't been through that. There's so many ways to waste experience, good or bad. And I think that, as you know, this is where it gets a little preachy, and this is where, you know, the people who went up against Hitchens would say, okay, well, this is where religion and connection with a creator comes in, and some code from a higher source is, why do you think people should then take their experiences? How can it matter? Why is this better? You know, if we're all just primordial scum that learn to walk over the course of millions of years. And I get the questions, but at the end of the day, if there's two camps of people that want to alleviate suffering, the religious and the non-believer altruist, even selfishly based, to get on each other's case about, why do you care for my motivation? And other than the point of trying to prove your God is real, which to me, you're being selfish trying to prove what you believe is right over encouraging people like myself to do what your God says to do. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think you got to like major in the majors. And if the whole goal from both parties is to help or to alleviate suffering or unnecessary pain that we can have a say in, then we can actually do a lot more harm trying to point out each other's flaws in it than just, okay, then how do we do it best? And that's again, it always comes back to that for me. Like, it's the final answer to me in a lot of those debates.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the, as you, I'm sure, can agree, um, one of the, one of the, again, I guess, ironies with the Four Horsemen of New Atheism movement is that they were as fundamental in their rhetoric as the fundamentalists. The
Sure.
only difference is that they didn't, well, in the name of atheism anyway, and this is a whole other discussion, because some religious folk like to say, well, Stalinism was a direct consequence of atheism, which, well, no, it was a political movement that happened to be, atheism happened to be, I guess, in the whirlwind of that, but it wasn't necessarily motivated by it. Um, yeah, I mean, how many murderers sort of murder in the name of atheism? Well, none, right? But when you
No.
think of how many, well, I want to be fair here, and I'm always trying to be fair. Like how many religious, which we have to be fair, because I wouldn't regard them as, like some people say, and this is off track, but it's still part of the point. It's like, well, some people, I don't like when people say a Muslim, like sort of terrorist or whatever. Like I don't think, I think that's, it does make sense, because that isn't what the Quran is talking about, right? And it's the same with, I don't know, certain sects of Christianity or whatever. Like it's an oxymoron. It doesn't, they don't compute. Like it's not the same thing. They are fundamentalists of their own interpretation far from the actual source.
Hmm.
And so the new atheists, again, the problem with them is that they conflated a politically driven hate crime with actual scripture, and its, I suppose, prescriptions that it was going for. But
Well, this is
yeah,
interesting. So, like, maybe we're getting offhand, and who cares? Because I don't get the chance to have a lot of these kinds of conversations, and so maybe we'll just spend 5 minutes rolling around in this mud, because it still is, it connects. I, so I want to maybe call you on this and see what your response is. I love that you are being fair and understanding where the new atheists went wrong, that they mainly only looked at the most fundamental cases of religion, attacked it as religion, and didn't paint the correct picture. Where I think that why they did that is not as intellectually honest as possible, but where it was still very beneficial, though, is the only people calling the fundamentalist, we'll stick with Christians since it's what I know best instead of diving into the Quran. The only people calling Christian fundamentalists Christians are the Christians who don't want to be associated with a certain interpretation that they have, a more
mm,
moderate or more liberal Christian. But they're still making the same claim that the book is true, that it's and that it's coming from a perfect power. And in doing so, they allow for fundamentalism. If you strip scripture of its inherent perfection and omniscient quality, then we can treat it for what it is, whether someone misinterprets it or not. Someone can read Matthew and go on a killing spree, and someone can read Matthew and help their neighbor. To me, the problem comes that someone told both of these groups what Matthew wrote was perfect. And I think that that dismantling of religion in general, of that truth coming from an outside source that we cannot verify, is what the harm is. And it's most represented in when someone does harm, like a fundamentalist. But there are so many moderate and liberal Christians that, to me, still do tons of verbal, sociological, psychological harm in the name of something healthy. Like, look at purity culture in Christian religions and the impact that has on young women and their sex lives in the future and their shame and their guilt. Like, that is not some fundamentalist side. That is a very, this is what all interpretations of what a woman's place is in the Bible leads to. And so you're super fair, and I like it, and I'm glad that you say it. But at the same time, I think that it's still necessary to criticize it on the whole, because that's what it can lead to. You know what I mean?
Mm. Oh yeah, no, I totally believe that whilst whilst religious people say that, well, without God everything's permitted, I say, well, with God everything is permitted as well, because, well,
That's
as
interesting.
far as you're concerned, the text is divine and unalterable, unfalsifiable. It's all matter of fact. Well, even worse, it's divinely inspired. That means that no debate is applicable against the text, whereas at least secular humanism has room for debate. It has a bit of democracy, right?
Hmm.
So there can actually be a discussion in the first place. Whereas with scripture, it's not really a discussion. It's more of which interpretation makes the most sense to this
Exactly.
particular historian or theologian, philosopher. So yeah, I mean, it's you've got to give the devil its due as well. Like you have to be frank where you need to be, and that's what Hitchens and the New Atheists were really good at. They, like you said, they attacked where it needed to be attacked. And like I say in my article recently, of the Four Horsemen, I think you checked it out, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like I said, they weren't the intellectual idols that necessarily were the best, but hell, did they do a lot of good? Like,
Yeah,
did
they
they not
advanced it.
did they not promote it? I have got a question for you, going back to the topic,
Yes, it's
of
probably a good idea.
charity and like, yeah,
Have me on for
yeah,
another time, because I still would love to go down the Stalin rabbit hole and Hitler, and
yes.
but let's come back. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'm sure we have a fair few talks ahead of us, perhaps. So, but yeah, it's the I want to ask you. I guess the question that bugs me with charitability and so on is, how far are you going to go? Like, how far are you willing to go? Because look, you could say all day that, yeah, look, I agree with charity, I give to charity, but I could equally turn around and say, well, but why aren't you giving money to children with malaria? Why, and presumably you're, let's say, giving money to blind children in a third world country. Like, who's to say the hierarchy of your value is applicable, right, justifiable? Because at the end of the day, we need to choose which charities we apply for. We need to, and this is the issue. We need to actually create a hierarchy with what apparently we think is the most dangerous, insulting to our emotions, etc., etc. Like, we need to have a hierarchy of what is the most um, disagreeable. What do you think about that?
I think so many things. First of all, it's such a good question, because it's like four questions, and it's probably like the four questions that this book came out to answer. So I do
Nice.
have personal opinions for you, as well as professional opinions for you. So the first one is creating a hierarchy of need. And finally, unlike religious text, unlike anecdotal experience, we can now use logic, rationale, and data to create this hierarchy. And how they do this is this: they call it a qualia point. All right. And so there's a literal point system in the book for judging things. Now, what it uses as its baseline is years of improved extended life. So those are two things, right? We can extend life. So an example is an 80-year-old that would die at 80 and now will die at 100. Okay, so there's 20 years. Another example of improving life would be like curing blindness. And what they've done with that is they've taken people who were blind and are no longer blind. They had them rate their quality of life before and after. Or same things with someone who had HIV and wasn't on treatment and then got treatment. What was the quality of their life before? And they average this out and they get enough of a large sample group that it's scientifically fair. And let's say that it's 40% better. For math's sake, let's say it's 50% better quality of life to be with sight than blind. And someone is 20 when they receive that treatment, and the average life expectancy is 80. So we have 60 years of 50% life improvement. That's 30, right? If you're following the math. So if we're comparing helping a sighted or a non-sighted person at 20 gain sight with an expectation they'll have 60 years of that, that's actually more beneficial than helping the 80-year-old live to 100. That only equaled 20. And there's some other factors. It's really fair. Like you probably just thought in your head of one or two, like, well, what's the quality of life of someone who's 80 going into the next 20 years, right? Like, what if they have dementia and they don't even know it for the last 10 years? And they actually do a pretty good job about taking into account some of that and using a sliding scale and percentages to make that quality of point equal across the board. Now, it may leave room to be perfected over time, but it's a standard that's there. And to me, it makes a great deal of sense. So then you look at the charity and then the effectiveness of the charity and the cost of the dollar and what you get for it. And you can actually pretty quickly make some real time, real world expectations about if I'm going to give 10% of my income and I make 100 grand and I can give 10 grand, as an easy math example, here's what I get for that 10 grand if I go with X over X in terms of qualia points. And that is how they've chosen to answer that question. For that first question of the hierarchy of needs, I think that they kind of answered it. But where people get hung up, and this is the topic I'd bring up for discussion with you to hear your thoughts back, is this. My sister gets cancer, and I feel super passionate about this now. And I can give to cancer research. But in terms of qualia points and where my dollar is going to go, it is not nearly as effective as buying bed nets, which are going to help with malaria. Am I morally obligated to take that same time, money, energy, and passion towards the bed nets as I am the cancer research? Or should I let my emotional, anecdotal experience drive my giving instead?
Well, effectively, I see it as, well, how philosophical do you want to get when the chips are down? Because the problem is with philosophy in general is that it is hypothetical. And when we spend so much time thinking, our brains fall out and we become, irrational, emotional. But that can be a good thing, right? So it isn't to say that it isn't a good thing, but the thing that's important and philosophy itself doesn't address is that, yeah, look, when the chips are down, I don't blame anybody for not being philosophical in how they conduct themselves, because we're not even rational creatures. We're not rational at all. Like that isn't even built into us.
Even on our best day, yeah.
We're all just monkeys pretending to be smart, really. I mean, it's like we are really not supposed to be rational, and that's why it's so difficult to be rational. That's why math is not easy. That's why reading Nietzsche is not easy. So to answer your question, I don't know, but what I would say is that I would find it so difficult to keep my philosophical convictions when something as emotional, something as deeply rooted like that would come to me, because I don't know. I really don't know. But the question is, well, how far do we want to go in our philosophical consistency? Because look, if we were going to be so philosophically consistent, if we were really going to go that stretch, then why are we even living? Because by dying, by jumping off a bridge right now, yeah, sure, there will be some short-term pain from family members and so on if we were all to do that. But in the long run, antinatalism isn't you can't refute that as far as I'm concerned. Like,
there's a huge difference though between antinatalism and suicide once you're here. Like, yes, we didn't choose to be here,
yes,
but now that we are, we can make the choice to make it count as more than one life versus subtracting just one is the only choice you get there with suicide. Yes, I hear you on antinatalism though, and that's something I think people don't like to think about or talk about or have to accept that.
Yeah, so it's an unpopular subject. But no, I completely behind you. Yeah, maybe I was mistranslating the antinatalism, the idea there, because as we know, it's not to say that, it's to say before life's conception, before conception, that's when we should reconsider things, bringing new life into being. But it was more like population control, and like if we really want to do the best for nature,
Okay, I see.
actually just not existing at all is well, philosophically, if we care about that to the greatest extent, that's the best option, right? So we come down to the question of, and this is, as a vegan myself, this is probably one of the most difficult questions. Like, veganism in one way is a very antinatalist agenda, or philosophy, however you want to put it. I would consider it a philosophy, because it's much more complex than a diet, which some people love to straw man about. It's a philosophy that embodies a lot of, let's say, ethics. But the implications of veganism is antinatalism, because, well, less animals will be brought into existence, right? And my answer to that is, okay, so would you rather, about 90%, 95% of animals in agriculture are factory farmed. So what's the question here? Would you rather all these animals exist, but 95% of them be in factory farms, be tortured? We don't need to go into all of that, but we all know the gist, hopefully, of what happens there. And if you don't, I would say make yourself aware of that, because that's important, but yeah, I mean, do we concede all of the suffering and torture in factory farms, right? And say, well, yeah, look, even though they're suffering and they're being tortured and so on and so on, and we're exploiting them, but they're in existence anyway. So I guess that's better than them not being in existence. And then the question is, well, okay, so what's better? Animals not being in existence, or animals being in existence but suffering terribly and in torturous conditions and so on, being exploited? And my answer to that is, not being brought into existence is preferable.
For
And
sure.
that's a really tough pill to swallow, because, and even for me, because I'm taking that to the philosophical end there. I'm effectively saying, look, it's better for a cow not to exist if it goes through certain stages. And I find that the hypocrisy is that we apply the same sentiment to human beings, but we don't for animals. The only difference is we actually get something from the animals that we apply the
Yeah.
sentiment to, or don't. So it's again a double standard. But I don't want to go into this too much. But what I'm replying to here is basically that if I follow following the veganism thing to its fullest extent, I need to admit that it's better for an animal, or animals, not to exist. Animals appropriate to the factory farming industry, that is. It's better for them not to exist in general than it is for them to exist in factory farm conditions. And this is capitalism in a sense. It's like, well, and this is why it's so difficult to argue for socialism, because look, socialism on the face value has good intentions. The only question is, what are the practical implications of socialism? And
And
that's
there's never
where
been
you
a good
have
one
to.
so far. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that again, it's a very controversial thing, and then
Yeah.
and it's the question is, well, do we take the risk of finding that out, finding where socialism will bring us, or do we not? And the other thing is as well is, and this goes back to the factory farming thing. It's all connected, right? In my head, at least, is that it is predicated on a capitalistic system, right? Because it is profit over well-being,
Hmm.
and that is really important. That is so important to consider. And by the way, anybody who's listening, I'm not really on either side with socialism and capitalism. I'm not. I'm still researching it. But this is what I found: it's that capitalism does actually produce factory farming. It does produce all of this because it's profit over well-being,
Hmm.
right? Effectively speaking. And so it's a big issue. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a detour, but I hope to have demonstrated that sometimes following philosophy to its fullest implications can leave you um, in a bed like Nietzsche for 10 whole years,
Yeah.
dying slowly. Those are my thoughts so far. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a detour.
No, I love it. And I always like getting into other branches of thought to help answer the one on the table. So I'm going to do my best to tie some of it together and to share what the book has to say about it. And I shouldn't. This isn't a book review on doing good better. This is a discussion on effective altruism. This book just happens to have covered some of the things we're naturally getting to. Let's do this. What you were asking in response to me asking my question was, how philosophically consistent should one be? And so there's a thought experiment that I'm sure you're very familiar with that I'm going to use as a base because it goes off in a way you might not be familiar with it. Do you know about Peter Singer's Drowning Child?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so I'll just state it quickly because there's a second part to it that is often overlooked. So the drowning child especially when it comes to giving and charity, is often brought up, right? You are driving to work and you see a little toddler flailing, eyes wide with terror, drowning in this pond. You're the only one around, no one else can help. You get out, you look down, you have on a $200 pair of shoes, you have on a $500 suit, you're going to this meeting. So if you walk into this pond, you can almost put a price on it, and maybe even being late for work or missing a meeting that would have got you promoted. I mean, you could make that price as small as the pair of shoes to the impact of whatever you could lose by missing the thing you were on your way to. You could put a very high price depending how many games you play. But let's just say it's $1,000 that you are going to part with if you walk into this pond and save this child. If you ask the average person this question, almost in this way, almost nobody says they would not stop and help the child. And what that says is, okay, so you have $1,000 you're willing to part with if it does the right thing. And there's a lot of the implications of, well, I saw the suffering with my own eyes. And this is often used to say, why won't you give to a child in Africa that's starving right now, that for $1,000, you could literally save their life? So that's one question, right? And all of us would say, one time, waste $1,000, get out of the car, help the child. So now you're driving to work, and this is the second part. There's 100 ponds, and there's 100 kids. How many times do you stop before you say, I have to go to work? And it would be very hard if that actually happened to you, to put a number. Child 42, I couldn't do it anymore. Everything I'm now, my wife is going to divorce me. I'm missing this. And now my kids, I've missed this game, and my boss already fired me. Like, something happened that, however long it's taking, however many, if you're playing this out in its full totality, there's a number. And maybe you make it to 100, and then you say, now there's 1,000. Well, when do you sleep? When do you feed yourself? How much in destitution will you let your family get while you stop at each of these children? Because the reality of the situation, there's an endless number of children that need to be saved. And so at some point, we are all making this choice, whether we like the visualization of turning the car around from child 42 or 151 or whatever the case is. And I think it's a really good visualization of what you're talking about, that at some point, we cannot do what we think we should for some selfish motive that's getting in the way. And this is one of the biggest arguments against EA, if I'm going to bring up the other side of the coin, EA being effective altruism. And I think that it deters more people from giving than it helps them understand the right way to give, which is the difference that in the book, I think would make. The big one is this, like, are you going to let your family go into destitution? One of the other examples that I think is so easy to wrap your head around is, I've had my first meal of the day. Someone else out there hasn't. Why should I eat my lunch or go pay for a lunch or buy groceries for lunch until I have done everything I can to help everyone who hasn't even had their first meal yet? Like, this is a very fair rationale of alleviating suffering. I don't need a second meal when someone else still hasn't had one. That's not fair. If I believe in this, then I should not be eating lunch or dinner anymore. And people think that's crazy. That's like such an extreme reaction. But if you're philosophically consistent, it would be a normal reaction. And so your question is, I'm not saying these are easy answers, because I still have lunch and dinner, and I still buy books that I don't need that I could read for free from the library, and I'm not perfect with my money. And so the middle ground is this. Most people who make those objections do so and then do nothing. So instead of asking someone to be philosophically consistent enough to drive themselves wild to the point of inaction, let's pick a percentage. And that's what this book has also done. And so the goal of EA, and through organizations they work with, like GiveWell, which is a charity assessment tool that you can see online, and you can either just give to the GiveWell organization and they spend your money as wisely as possible, so you don't have to do the research and take the time. And there's good reason to trust them versus other organizations, and that's laid out in the book. But the percentage they arrived at is 10% And this is what they're asking of the top 1%. And they do some really interesting charts about if truly everyone who is in the top 1% of the world, not the 1% of the 1%, if truly everyone who is in the top 1% of the world financially gave 10% of their income, this is what it could do. This is the suffering alleviated. This is the lives saved. And it's astronomical. I'm not going to say it ends world hunger, but it's unbelievable what the science says it could do. And most people listening don't think they're in the 1%, but they list some number and they explain it. I think it's 27 grand in American US dollars in our particular economy, that if you make 27 grand, you are in the, or more, the 1%, and you have the ability, without starving or putting your family in destitution or losing your job, to give 10% of that. And, you know, maybe someone else wants to make that number 38 instead of 27,000, fine. But there's some threshold that most of us fall into that are not currently giving 10%, and we could, and it would be better than nothing. So instead of turning Nietzsche-esque and going mad, like, pick your number, and this is what the book does at the end. Pick your number, pick a system, set it up, tell other people about it. If you have the opportunity once in a while to do more, do it. And it helps answer the cancer question too. Set up your 10% to go to the malaria bed nets, because it's the most effective thing you can do with your money. And then if you have a personal experience that happens upon you and you don't want to have to make the philosophical choice between, we understand human psychology, take 5% and go help that, but return to this, you know? And so I like that it's not as black and white as most philosophy is, because it understands the climate, the culture, the psychology, our inerrancies and rationale and logic, and gives us tools that still do more than what we're currently doing. So that's the big answer back to all of that.
I
It's
want to
not
ask
perfect.
you something.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I want to ask you something. Um, the thing that I'm considering, contemplating, is how do you define doing nothing? And I think this is really interesting, because is doing nothing not manually subscribing to a charity? Because in the UK, at least, it must be the same for the US to some extent, but when you pay your taxes, they go to certain charities. So how do we define doing nothing, right? And I could even go so far to say, if you even have a job, you're contributing to something in some extent. If you have a home, you're contributing in some way, you know, because you're still to the larger picture of society. So my question is, by being alive as the average person, aren't we already contributing? So my question is going further, which is, considering that, well, how do you determine if you should even give more? How much more should you give? Yeah, I'm wondering what you think of this. Like, by being alive, we are contributing.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really interesting philosophical question. And I think the best way to beat a philosophical question is with a little perspective. And I agree, and I have an actual answer for you, but let me give the sarcastic Hitchens remark first, to maybe just like create the other side of the coin. If you were a dad in Bangladesh right now after a famine, holding your 2-year-old son who doesn't understand what's going on, and all you needed in that economy was $100, and you could feed your son for the next year. And there's some American that makes 72 grand a year that says, I bought a house and I pay my taxes. Nothing more is required of me. Would this answer suffice to you as that dad? Now, I know it's a tongue-in-cheek question and it's a little more rhetorical. I won't make you actually answer. But the point is, like, and because that dad could also ask the question if you gave 10% instead of 15%, because that 15% allowed him to get that $100 instead of his neighbor, right? Like, so there's always more you can do. But this black and white fallacy of, and you're saying maybe it's not black and white because first you have to establish what black is, what nothing is. And so I think it's a super fair question. But I would say there's a status quo. And the status quo of owning a home, making an income, paying your taxes, that is generally accepted as normal, average, etc., is maybe where I would put nothing, because it's everyday existence outside of me doing something not for myself entirely. You pay your taxes because otherwise you go to jail. You have a house because you wanted a house instead of an apartment. You wanted more room. You wanted to have friends over, etc. There's something above that next step that starts to change from black to white. And that's, I think, how I would answer it, that it's to do the first, seemingly, even though we know it's not, non-selfish thing above our status quo. If I was coming up with an off-the-cuff answer.
Yeah,
I
no,
haven't
no, no.
thought it all the
I
way
think
through.
that's a very good answer, and it reminds me of the whole veganism thing as well. Like from me participating in veganism and not buying animal products, I would agree with you using that same logic that I'm doing something beyond what the a priori expectation or norm is, which is me actually. And this is the thing as well. Sometimes it's just down to people not actually wanting to take responsibility, because to some extent there is an extra level of responsibility we can all take. I mean, whether that's veganism, whether that's giving to a certain charity or another charity or another charity, I don't, and this is something that I struggled with veganism and thinking about veganism, because a lot of I've always said that vegans are veganism's worst enemy, because they are the worst representatives of it mostly, and that's because they are a vegan for emotional reasons. And look, fair enough. But what I would also say to that is, okay, but what is beyond that? And there's a lot beyond that, actually. And it's what Peter Singer talks about as well. It's the philosophical implications, it's philosophical consistency. And look, I don't want to go into all of that, but look, I suppose the question that was bugging me was, and not that I thought this, but it's obviously contentious, which is, and a lot of vegans do it, can I blame anybody for not being a vegan if they give to charity, if they do all
Oh, I
these
see.
other things? Like
Mm.
it's a really interesting question, because on one hand you could say, well, yeah, particularly to the animal agriculture, and animal agriculture is the #1 lead of climate change, etc., etc. Look, yeah, you could pull up all of those things to make it higher in the hierarchy, which maybe it is actually eligible to be a priority, because it is, considerably speaking, it is the highest, if not one of the highest issues. And so, look, maybe you can make a case from that, and I want to hear your thoughts. Like, we have to pick and choose which thing we subscribe to, right? And that, I guess, this whole thing is subjective to me, and this is where I'm just struggling, because, and it's not that I disagree, it's more of just a devil's advocate. Like, we have to still choose.
Hmm.
We still have to choose what we do, and we still have to justify that choice of doing something. And look, yeah, you could say doing something for the sake of it, that's still something, I agree. I suppose it's just the philosopher in me thinking, well, I don't know, there's not a solid enough justification there. But I'm just speaking out loud of my mind. Like, I agree pretty much with what we're both saying, but I just want to pose that to you and see if you have anything to add.
No, I think it's important to take a step back and understand that no one is, there is no consistent belief that one should give more than nothing, or more than their existence, or more than they already do if they do give. And so all of those are extremely subjective, and we are talking about them in less subjective ways. Like, you should give, and when you give, you should give like this, etc. Granted, it's in the name of the entire philosophy we're talking about here, with effective altruism, which is kind of, it's doing two things. One, it is assuming that whoever is interested in it, it would pick up a book like this, or would go to an effective altruism course, or anything like that, already has some interest, and then we're providing an outlet. But comparing it with veganism is interesting, right? Because like you said, they're so often their biggest problem, because the emotions get in the way of the practicality. And a perfect example of this is like the person who posts on the vegan subreddit for the first time and says, I cut my meat down from this to this last month. And the vegans all say it should have been 0, right?
Yeah,
Instead of
yeah.
recognizing that, yes, it's still terrible that it was a percentage at all, and you still murdered animals and tortured animals. And you can say that with a high horse of morality and justice, and be correct and be disbeneficial. And if your goal is to really benefit the cause you say you believe in, then baby steps for some people might be the only way they ever
Oh
truly
yeah.
attain there. That doesn't mean you should preach that everyone should do a 10-step program in becoming vegan. It's great if you can do it cold turkey. But yes, I think it's a perfect example of there's these goals we have, whether, or I should say, maybe not goals we have. There's some cause we subscribe to. And if we don't take a philosophical approach to how we think about it and think through what other people are going to say about it, or if they're going to believe in it, or if they should believe in it, or their subjective experience in getting to it, we're going to be less beneficial with that. And so I can't make the cause or the case that, it's hard for me to say this, I can't make an actual case that everyone should give. It is my personal belief system based off many things that if someone can, they should. And I think that I'm justified in saying that, but I also understand if someone doesn't believe that. And which is why I wanted to have a conversation with you about it, not because you don't, but because this is something I am passionate about. And so I have some kind of a platform, and here I am, right? But in answering your actual question of how do we move it to the next level of acceptance, I don't have a good answer for it. And I'll say one more thing that came to mind, like it gets back to kind of the religious principle and ideas of it too. You know, the Great Commission from Christ is to be a missionary. And it's not to prayerfully do it. It's to go, verb go, move your feet into all of the nations and preach the good news. And how many Christians have mentally gymnastics themselves out of this by saying they don't have to be that philosophic, or I would say now theologically consistent. People need to support the economy first, or none of these missionaries are going to get out there. People need to pray for these people and intercede so that the right people with the right gifts can do the action. And it's like, that's all fine, but it's not being perfectly theologically consistent. If you believe Jesus was the Son of God who died for you and he said, do this, you should be doing this. And that's actually one of the things that got me to my crux of deconverting, is I got to the point where I was feeling so inconsistent with my beliefs that it was like, we're going to move to the mission field or this isn't real. And in trying to divine that final moment, I started to see it fall apart. A topic for another time for sure. But my point is that no one in any belief system can be fully on mission, on point, on task, that too many of us take that as an excuse to do very little, if not nothing, when there is a middle ground that is of benefit to more people.
Yeah, no, I'm right behind you. I'm right behind you, man. I mean, I agree that, yeah, it's kind of like what I said as well. I mean, we're both sort of meeting each other at the same end. Like, um, there are many causes, that there are many things that we got to do, but just doing something, you know, is good. It's great. In fact, it's great. Like, I'm not against, yeah, which is the reason why I find it very difficult to be against people for not. I mean, the thing is, right? It's the same thing with the drowning child. Like, when you go up to people on the street, or not when you, but if you do, if you have the goal for it, but if you ask them the question, well, do you agree with animal abuse? Pretty much 99% of people would say they don't agree with it. So in actual fact, people theoretically are vegans. They just don't act it out. And the reason why they don't act it out is because, look, philosophical criticisms of veganism aside, there's a lot of misconceptions, basically. A lot. I mean, again, I don't want to make this too much about veganism, but it's just the practice behind it. And this is, again, the word responsibility. And that's what it comes down to. I think, to some extent, entertaining a question is one thing, but practically becoming an allegiance with it is completely different, which is the reason why when I first read Animal Liberation, when I first looked into veganism, because before veganism I was actually against it, and then when I did, and I've said this numerous times at this point, it's like when I found out that I was wrong, and that actually there is something here. This isn't just some flippant idea, because look, again, it's easy to be convinced by these bad vegan activists talking about it in their particular ways, but actually looking into the philosophical basis behind it, not just as a diet, not just as this SJW propaganda. There is actually some pretty deep philosophical arguments for it. Not to say that it can't be criticized, because parts of it can be, but I think on the whole, we all agree with it. That's the thing, we all agree with it. But the question is, how aware are we of it, and how many misconceptions of it do we have?
Yeah, this
How,
is.
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so it's just all of these things put together that create this idea of veganism, and other subjects as well, like charity. I mean, as we both know, charity, people lift their eyebrow of it, and they say, well, where does it go? Is it going to go to loads of warlords, etc., etc.? Look, there are misconceptions about a lot of things, and this is again, before this discussion, I haven't really brought the two together, veganism and effective altruism, but they are interlinked in this, in the way that they're perceived. At least there are misconceptions, that there is propaganda as well in some cases, and there's valid points on either sides, but the main thing that I want to leave this sort of discussion with is, we already agree with the principles behind both of these ideas. Let's say veganism and altruism, we agree with them. It's just whether we not only take the responsibility, and I use that as a vague word because that can mean a lot of things, but in a general sense, I mean, are we ready to be philosophically consistent? Are we ready to actually embody our belief enough? Because in a way, you don't necessarily believe in something unless you act it out. And I think if you don't act out your belief, you don't necessarily believe it. And I know that can contradict what I said earlier, but I think that they kind of meet both ways, because deep down people do believe in this stuff. It's just the practicality. It's just what we've been told, what we've been educated with. So yeah, I'll just leave it there, and I'll exit any rambling episodes from here.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. The tie together I would put, because I think we came to an interesting head, is I think there's two things going on. One, and when I got excited there, is when you mentioned awareness, because how many people are not yet vegan and still eat McDonald's cheeseburgers every single day, who just haven't thought it through? It's not even available for them to consider. They grew up in a culture, this is what you do, you eat cows, you pet dogs, and I'm fine. And of course they would answer your question on the street as, yes, animal suffering, animal torture is wrong. They've never been able to consider. And so that's one, is awareness. And then two, like you said, what you do with the awareness or acting out the belief, which I would love to talk to you someday about, if belief is true without action. I mean, that's almost a Christian doctrine idea. Aside from that, there's a second point that, okay, someone gets presented with the information. They become aware of the need, the suffering. And so in vegan, it's, they realize what's happening to animals in factory farming. With giving, I won't even say effective altruism. I'm gonna put giving or charity next to veganism. The awareness there is people are suffering, and again, same thing. Someone might blow $100 at the casino and at the same time not conceive of a starving child. And so first we shine the light. And that's what conversations like this are great for, vegan subreddits or Cosmic Skeptic, or, going to a gala for a charity fundraiser, and you get the awareness. But once you arrive somewhere, animal suffering is wrong, human suffering is wrong, and you say, I want to do something about it. But someone arrives at that point, and what effective altruism and what a vegan lifestyle, not vegetarian, not plant-based, not it's a diet and sometimes I cheat. True veganism, true effective altruism is what I would put at the next tier, is acting out that belief system as efficiently as possible, which some of this is my personality. On the Gallup Strengths Finder, my number one strength is maximizer. So if I'm going to give money, once I've decided I want to give to charity, a book that tells me the most effective way to do that, perfect. If I'm going to commit to veganism, if I recognize animal suffering is real, I don't want to just be plant-based. I don't want to have cheat Fridays. I don't want to still wear leather. There is some effective altruism term for veganism, or maybe it's just being vegan over vegetarian, of understanding the full implications of that. And a lot of people think it's extreme, and I don't think so. I think it's accurate. There's an accurate way to live a true vegan lifestyle, and there's an accurate way to give if your concern is humanity's suffering. And at least for what we're talking about today, like effective altruism is a way to accurately utilize that belief system. So that is, I felt it was needed to be said, because so many times we just reach right up to that point of I should give and it's better to give, but what's my true responsibility? And then back down here. Just take one more step and be as effective as you can. So that's my preachy point of the day.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Like, I mean, I suppose I can end this with a final anecdote with the veganism is extreme thing. I mean, I've always found it quite interesting because it's interesting to say that veganism is extreme when there's some kind of cognitive dissonance going on at the same time of saying that, and it's not remembering what actually happens to the animals, as if that isn't extreme.
Right.
Like,
Totally.
as if that isn't extreme. Same thing with climate change. Like, some activists might be extreme, and I'm not condoning sort of certain activism, but what I will say is, okay, look, maybe it is extreme, but you know why it's extreme? Because the cause itself and what's underneath it, the implications of that are very, very extreme. Not only just independently, but also dependently on how the world progresses from this very moment. Shock horror, not everything is in the present. Things that actually have implications.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be a good time to wrap things up. Thank you, Brandon. This has been a great, productive conversation. You've really tweaked my brain in many different ways, ways of thinking about things. So, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. Obviously,
Oh, I'd love to.
we have like 10 different things we could possibly discuss. So I
For
look
sure.
forward to it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't been able to say I didn't hop in during the intro, but obviously, man, I love your channel, and your conversations are always, the one word that comes to mind so much when I watch you interact, especially with people that don't necessarily align as much as you and I do, is just fairness, understanding the other side, even in your responses today with like veganism and suffering. So I admire that about you. Love talking with you about all of it. And yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandon.
All right. See ya.
See ya.